Before we uncover what the sands have hidden for millennia, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what hour finds you there? Settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade. Tonight we travel back, far back, before the Pharaohs, before Egypt itself had a name. The Great Pyramid stands on the Giza Plateau. Official history says it was built around 2560 BCE by Pharaoh Khufu. But what if that date is wrong? What if the monuments we call Egyptian were already ancient when the first pharaohs arrived? What if they inherited rather than built? The evidence is carved in stone, eroded by water, aligned with stars that have since moved across the sky. And it tells a different story. A story of builders who left no names. A civilization that vanished so completely that only their monuments remain. The true builders of Giza. Let your breath slow. Let the centuries fall away. And descend with me into the mystery that Egyptology has spent a century trying to ignore. Tonight we question everything we were taught about the pyramids. Tonight we follow the evidence wherever it leads, however far it takes us. The Sphinx gazes east, waiting for a constellation that has precessed out of position. The stones fit together with precision we cannot explain. Something happened on the Giza Plateau long before history began to keep records. Something that left marks we are only now learning to read. This is not about rejecting Egypt's achievements. This is about understanding what they inherited, what was already there when they arrived. Let the night carry you backward through millennia as we uncover the truth that lies beneath the official story of the world's most famous monuments. The conventional narrative of ancient Egypt is familiar to anyone who has opened a history book or visited a museum. Around 3100 BCE, the legendary King Narmer unified Upper and Lower Egypt, founding the first dynasty and beginning the long sequence of pharaonic rule. Over the following centuries, Egyptian civilization developed with remarkable speed, culminating in the construction of the Great Pyramids during the Fourth Dynasty. Khufu built the Great Pyramid, Khafra built the Second Pyramid and supposedly the Sphinx. Menkaure built the third. The story is neat, orderly, and almost universally accepted in academic circles. But neat stories should always invite closer examination. When we look at the evidence with fresh eyes, problems emerge that the conventional narrative cannot easily resolve. The Great Pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, with some blocks weighing over 70 tons. The precision of its construction rivals, and in some cases exceeds, modern engineering capabilities. Its base is level to within 2.1 centimeters across more than 13 acres of foundation. Its sides are aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree. These are not the achievements of a civilization just learning to work stone. The official timeline gives Khufu approximately 23 years to complete his pyramid, the length of his reign. Simple mathematics reveals what this means. To place 2.3 million blocks in 23 years requires quarrying, transporting, shaping, and placing one block every 2 to 3 minutes, around the clock, every day, for over 2 decades. The logistics are staggering even before considering the precision required. The labor force would need to number in the tens of thousands, all coordinated with an efficiency that challenges modern project management capabilities. Consider that just generations before Khufu, Egyptian architecture consisted primarily of mud brick structures. The transition from mud brick to the greatest stone monument ever built happened with a speed that demands explanation. Egyptologists attribute this leap to Egyptian genius, to a civilization that simply accelerated its development once political unification created the necessary conditions. But there is another possibility that deserves serious consideration. What if the Fourth Dynasty pharaohs did not build these monuments, but inherited them from builders far more ancient? This alternative explanation has been proposed by researchers outside academic mainstream for over a century. They have been consistently dismissed as cranks, as pseudoscientists, as romantic dreamers unable to accept the remarkable achievements of ancient peoples. But the evidence they point to is physical, measurable, carved into the very stones of the Giza Plateau. That evidence tells a story that contradicts what we have been taught, and it deserves examination regardless of who first noticed it. The Sphinx presents the most visible challenge to conventional dating. This massive limestone sculpture, with the body of a lion and a human head, crouches on the Giza Plateau, facing due east toward the rising sun. Orthodox Egyptology attributes it to Pharaoh Khafre, dating its creation to approximately 2500 BCE. But the stone itself tells a different story, one written in patterns of erosion that geologists recognize immediately as the signature of water, not wind or sand. Orthodox Egyptology places its construction during the reign of Khafre, around 2500 BCE, a date that has been taught in universities and displayed in museums for over a century. In 1991, geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University examined the Sphinx enclosure and made a startling observation that would challenge the foundations of Egyptological dating. The erosion patterns on the walls surrounding the Sphinx were not consistent with wind and sand erosion, the dominant weathering forces in the Sahara for the past 5,000 years. Instead, the patterns showed deep vertical fissures and rounded, undulating surfaces characteristic of water erosion, specifically the kind of weathering caused by precipitation and water runoff over extended periods of time. The implications of Schoch's observation were profound and unsettling to conventional Egyptology. The Sahara became a desert around 5000 BCE, before which it experienced a period of abundant rainfall known to climatologists as the Neolithic subpluvial. This wetter period ended between approximately 5000 and 3000 BCE. For the Sphinx enclosure to show the significant water erosion that Schoch documented, the monument would need to have existed during this wetter climate, meaning it was carved at least 1,000 years before Khafre's reign, and possibly much, much earlier. Schoch initially proposed a conservative date of around 5000 to 7000 BCE for the original carving of the Sphinx, already pushing the monument back thousands of years before conventional dating allows. Other researchers, noting the exceptional depth of the erosion features, have suggested even earlier dates, perhaps extending back to 10,000 BCE or beyond. Such dates would place the Sphinx's construction during the last ice age, created by a civilization that predates not just ancient Egypt, but every other civilization currently recognized by mainstream archaeology. The geological community has largely validated Schoch's observations about the erosion patterns themselves, even when individual geologists disagree about the conclusions drawn from those observations. The weathering on the Sphinx enclosure walls is demonstrably different in character from the wind erosion visible on other structures at Giza built during the dynastic period. Something caused this distinctive weathering pattern, and precipitation-induced water erosion remains the most scientifically plausible explanation available. There is another anomaly with the Sphinx that any careful observer can see without specialized knowledge. The head is disproportionately small for the body. The ratio is simply wrong. A lion with a head that size relative to its body would appear stunted, malformed. This observation has led researchers to propose that the current head is not the original one, that the Sphinx was initially carved with a much larger lion's head, proportional to its massive body, which was later recarved into the human pharaonic form we see today. If this theory is correct, the most likely candidate for the recarving would be Khafra himself, who may have placed his own likeness on an ancient monument to claim it for his dynasty. This would explain several puzzling features. The head shows far less weathering than the body, suggesting it was carved later from deeper, less exposed limestone. The proportions make sense only if we assume a larger original head was reduced to create the current form, carving away the most weathered outer stone. If the Sphinx was originally a complete lion, it may have been designed to face a constellation that has since precessed to a different position in the sky. Due to the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis, star positions change over a cycle of approximately 26,000 years. If the Sphinx was aligned to face Leo rising at the spring equinox, that alignment would have been most precise around 10,500 BCE, during what astrologers call the Age of Leo. This astronomical correlation suggests an antiquity far beyond anything conventional Egyptology is prepared to accept. In the Cairo Museum sits a curious artifact that rarely receives the attention it deserves from visitors or scholars. The inventory stele, discovered in the 19th century near the Sphinx temple, contains an inscription that directly contradicts the official story of who built what at Giza. According to its hieroglyphic text, Khufu did not construct the Great Pyramid. He found it already standing when he arrived. The stele records that Khufu came to the plateau to inspect the Sphinx, which already existed, and built a small temple beside it. Mainstream Egyptologists dismiss the inventory stele as a later forgery, created during the 26th dynasty around 600 BCE, more than 2,000 years after Khufu's reign. They argue that priests of that later era fabricated the document to legitimize their own religious claims by creating a false connection to the prestigious Fourth Dynasty. But this dismissal raises troubling questions that are rarely addressed. Why would later priests create a document that diminishes rather than enhances their ancestral heritage? If you were fabricating evidence to glorify your civilization's past, would you claim that its greatest monuments were merely found rather than built? The inventory stele makes Khufu a maintainer, a restorer, a respectful inheritor of something already ancient. This seems an odd forgery indeed. The stele may instead preserve a genuine tradition that the Fourth Dynasty pharaohs themselves acknowledged, that the Giza monuments were not their work, that they had inherited something remarkable from the deep past. The absence of construction records for the pyramids becomes more striking when compared to documentation from other periods of Egyptian history. Egyptian bureaucracy was remarkably thorough, recording everything from grain shipments to labor rotations to the smallest administrative details. We have extensive records of how new kingdom temples were constructed, how obelisks were quarried at Aswan and transported to Karnak, how tomb decorations were planned and executed. For the greatest building project in human history up to that point, we have almost nothing. The only contemporary text directly linking Khufu to the Great Pyramid is a cartouche, a royal name marking, found in a relieving chamber above the king's chamber. But this marking was discovered under suspicious circumstances in 1837 by Howard Weiss, who was under pressure to justify his expensive expedition with significant fines. Even if the cartouche is genuine, finding a name painted in a hidden space proves only that workers during Khufu's reign had access to the structure, not that they built it. The workers' village discovered near Giza in the 1990s demonstrates that large labor forces were present during the Fourth Dynasty, housed and fed in organized facilities. But the presence of workers proves occupation, not construction. These workers could have been restoring weathered surfaces, adding new elements to existing structures, or completing projects begun by others. The village confirms activity at Giza during the Fourth Dynasty without resolving what that activity accomplished. The remains include bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities, all suggesting a well-organized workforce that lived and worked at Giza for extended periods during the Fourth Dynasty. At Saqqara, the step pyramid of Djoser was built just before the Fourth Dynasty and shows unmistakable evidence of architectural experimentation. The builders changed their plans multiple times during construction, leaving visible traces of their learning process. Mistakes were made and corrected. The structure evolved as the work progressed. The Great Pyramid shows nothing comparable. It was executed with a confidence and precision that suggests the builders knew exactly what they were doing from the very beginning. The precision achieved in the Great Pyramid seems to exceed what copper tools, wooden sledges, and stone pounders would allow. Consider the casing stones that originally covered the pyramid's exterior, creating the smooth, gleaming white surface that ancient visitors described with wonder. These were limestone blocks, cut and polished to a mirror finish, fitted together with joints measuring less than 1/50th of an inch. Modern stonemasons with power tools and laser levels struggle to achieve such precision consistently. Inside the pyramid, the granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber was carved from a single block of Aswan granite, one of the hardest stones known to ancient builders. Its interior surfaces are polished to tolerances that would challenge modern manufacturing equipment. The corners are square to within margins that approach the limits of contemporary measurement precision. Achieving this level of accuracy in such intractable material with copper and stone seems implausible to engineers familiar with the properties of granite. The so-called relieving chambers above the king's chamber contain massive granite beams, each weighing between 40 and 80 tons, transported from Aswan quarries some 500 miles away. These megaliths were not merely moved, but precisely positioned, stacked in 5 layers above the burial chamber. The conventional explanation involves enormous ramps, wooden rollers, and unlimited human labor. But no evidence of ramps capable of supporting such weights has ever been found at Giza, despite extensive archaeological investigation. The orientation of the Great Pyramid to true north is accurate to within 3/60ths of a degree, a precision that modern surveying equipment can barely improve upon. Achieving this accuracy requires either incredibly sophisticated measurement techniques or the ability to correct observations accumulated over generations. The Fourth Dynasty Egyptians would have had limited time for such accumulated observation. A predecessor civilization, operating over millennia, would not have faced this constraint. Tool marks found on various Egyptian monuments show curious patterns that suggest rotating implements. Yet no evidence of rotating cutting technology has been found in Fourth Dynasty archaeological contexts. The spiral patterns visible in some drill holes, the consistent depth of cutting marks across hard stone surfaces, these features suggest mechanical assistance of a kind that copper tools and stone pounders cannot provide. The technology implied by the finished work exceeds the technology found in the archaeological record. The granite boxes in the Serapeum at Saqqara, supposedly carved for bull burials during the New Kingdom, show machine precision tolerances on their interior surfaces. Each box was carved from a single block of granite and polished to a smoothness that seems beyond hand-finishing capabilities. Some researchers have suggested these containers were not created in the era attributed to them, but were inherited from a much earlier period, repurposed for uses their original makers never intended. The craftsmanship required to achieve such results in materials this hard suggests either unknown tools or techniques that have been lost to time. Egyptian mythology speaks of an age before the pharaohs, a primordial era when the gods themselves walked the earth and ruled over Egypt directly. They called this epoch Tepi, which translates roughly as the first time or the first occasion. According to these traditions, divine beings descended and established civilization on earth, teaching humanity the essential arts of agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and sacred ritual. Eventually they withdrew, leaving human successors to maintain what had been established. Modern scholars treat Tepi as pure mythology, a creation story comparable to Genesis or the Dreamtime, expressing Egyptian cosmological beliefs rather than historical memory. But what if these traditions preserve something real, however distorted by millennia of retelling? What if the first time was a genuine era, inhabited by actual people whose technological capabilities seemed godlike to those who encountered them or inherited their works? Yet myths often preserve kernels of historical memory, distorted by centuries of retelling, but rooted in events that actually occurred in the distant past of the culture that tells them. The Turin King List, a hieratic papyrus from the reign of Ramses II, contains a comprehensive record of Egyptian rulers extending back to the beginning of time itself. The early sections name divine kings, gods who reigned for thousands of years each. Before the gods came the Shemsu Hor, translated as the followers of Horus or the companions of Horus, semi-divine beings who served as intermediaries between the wholly divine age and the era of human pharaohs. The document is fragmentary, damaged by time and handling, but enough survives to show that Egyptians maintained detailed records of rulers extending back into what they considered the Age of Gods. If we take these records seriously, even interpreting them symbolically rather than literally, they suggest that the ancient Egyptians themselves believed their civilization had roots extending far deeper than the first dynasty. They preserved memories, or what they believed were memories, of a time when other beings walked their land, built their monuments, established their traditions. The pharaohs presented themselves as inheritors and continuators, not as originators who created everything from nothing. The astronomical alignments at Giza support the possibility of much earlier planning. Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory proposes that the three main pyramids were laid out to mirror the three stars of Orion's belt, with the relative positions and sizes of the pyramids corresponding to the brightness and arrangement of the stars. But there is a complication involving time. Due to precession, the angle of Orion's belt relative to the Milky Way changes over the course of millennia. The three pyramids, viewed from above, form a pattern that mirrors the three stars with remarkable fidelity, their relative positions and brightnesses corresponding to the terrestrial layout. When Bauval calculated when the terrestrial layout would most precisely match the celestial pattern, the answer was not 2500 BCE, the conventional date for pyramid construction. The optimal correlation occurred around 10,500 BCE, during the astronomical age of Leo, precisely when the Sphinx, as an original lion monument, would have faced its corresponding constellation rising at the spring equinox. This date keeps appearing in alternative analyses, supported by different lines of evidence that were developed independently. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the stars in ways that pervaded every aspect of their culture. Their religion centered on celestial cycles, particularly the movements of Orion and Sirius. Their temples and tombs were oriented with astronomical precision that required centuries of accumulated observation. This obsession with celestial accuracy might represent their own achievements, or it might be the inheritance of predecessors who developed astronomical knowledge over timescales that the dynastic period cannot accommodate. If an advanced civilization existed before known history, Egypt may not have been their only location. Similar megalithic construction appears at sites around the world, suggesting either a civilization with global reach or the spread of building techniques from a common source. Massive stone blocks fitted without mortar, precision cutting in hard stone, orientation to astronomical alignments. These features appear in monuments separated by thousands of miles and, supposedly, thousands of years. In Peru, the fortress walls of Sacsayhuaman feature immense stones weighing over 100 tons, fitted together with such precision that even today a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. The Inca, when asked by Spanish conquistadors how these walls were built, replied that they did not build them, they found them. The construction was attributed to earlier peoples, to giants, to the gods themselves. The Inca maintained what they inherited, but could not explain it. The stones are not merely stacked, but interlocked in complex patterns, with some blocks featuring as many as 12 angles, each fitted perfectly to its neighbors without any binding material. Göbekli Tepe should not exist, according to conventional archaeological understanding. Hunter-gatherer societies were not supposed to be capable of such organized, large-scale construction requiring coordinated labor over extended periods. The site's existence proves that sophisticated construction capabilities existed far earlier than previously believed. If such capabilities existed in Turkey around 9600 BCE, the water erosion dating of the Sphinx to a similar period becomes far more plausible. The Younger Dryas period, spanning roughly from 10,900 to 9,700 BCE, witnessed dramatic climate disruption on a global scale. Temperatures dropped suddenly, sea levels fluctuated, and environmental conditions changed with a rapidity that would have been catastrophic for any civilization dependent on stable climate patterns. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that cometary fragments struck Earth during this period, triggering the climate shift and associated devastation. Ice cores, sediment layers, and other geological records confirm that this period saw massive disruption to ecosystems worldwide, with many large mammal species going extinct during this interval. If an advanced civilization existed before the Younger Dryas catastrophe, the impact and its aftermath would explain that civilization's disappearance. Survivors would have been scattered, their infrastructure destroyed, their knowledge fragmenting over generations of struggle for basic survival. Only their most durable monuments, those built in stone rather than perishable materials, would have survived the millennia between their time and the rise of cultures we recognize as ancient. The trauma would have been civilizational in scope, destroying not just populations, but the accumulated knowledge and institutional structures that complex societies require to function. Catastrophe memory appears in the mythologies of cultures worldwide. Flood stories exist in nearly every tradition, from the biblical account of Noah to the Sumerian tale of Utnapishtim, to flood narratives in Greek, Hindu, Chinese, and Native American traditions. Fire from the sky, prolonged periods of darkness, shifts in the positions of celestial bodies. These motifs recur across cultures that had no historical contact with each other. They may preserve genuine memory of actual events witnessed by ancestors whose descendants told the stories for thousands of years. At Abydos in Upper Egypt, beneath the temple of Seti I, lies a structure that has puzzled archaeologists since its discovery in the early 20th century. The Osirion, as it is called, is built in a completely different style from the elegant New Kingdom temple above it. Its construction features massive blocks of granite and limestone, fitted together without mortar, in the stark, megalithic style associated with the earliest phases of construction at Giza. The contrast between the refined elegance of Seti's temple and the stark, massive simplicity of the structure beneath it could hardly be more striking to anyone who visits the site today. Orthodox Egyptology insists that the Osirion was built by Seti I himself in the 13th century BCE, an intentional archaism meant to evoke ancient traditions. But everything about the structure argues against this interpretation. The megalithic blocks are larger and more roughly finished than anything else Seti built. The Osirion sits well below the temple's foundation level, as if it was always there, and Seti built over it, rather than creating it as part of his complex. The Nile Valley's dry climate has preserved artifacts that would have rotted away in wetter regions, giving us windows into daily life that other ancient cultures cannot provide. Most tellingly, the Osirion sits at a level that would have been below the water table for most of Egyptian history. When excavated, it was found flooded, its floor covered by groundwater that seeps through the surrounding bedrock. For this structure to have been built at this level, conditions would need to have been very different, with a water table much lower than it has been throughout the dynastic period. Such conditions last existed thousands of years before Seti's reign. Excavations continue to uncover workers' tombs near the pyramids, revealing that the builders were skilled craftsmen rather than slaves, honored with burial near the monuments they created. Underground spaces beneath the Giza Plateau have been detected by various surveying technologies, but never fully explored. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic analysis, and more recently, muon tomography have identified anomalies consistent with chambers and passages beneath the surface. Ancient writers, including Herodotus, described underground structures at Giza, chambers connecting the pyramids, tunnels extending for considerable distances. Some of these accounts may be exaggerated or imagined, but some may record genuine features that remain unexplored. In 2017, scientists announced the discovery of a large void within the Great Pyramid itself, detected through muon tomography, a technique that uses cosmic ray particles to image dense structures. This void, possibly a previously unknown chamber, lies above the Grand Gallery and may be 30 meters or more in length. What it contains, why it was built, whether it was ever accessible. These questions remain unanswered because the space has never been physically accessed. Hieroglyphic inscriptions describing construction methods remain frustratingly rare, as if the Egyptians considered the technique so well known they needed no explanation. Egyptian authorities have been cautious about permitting full investigation of anomalous spaces beneath and within the Giza monuments. Preservation concerns are cited, and these concerns are legitimate for structures of such irreplaceable value. But some researchers suspect that preliminary investigations have already revealed complications to the official narrative, discoveries that challenge conventional dating and thus remain unpublicized because they cannot be explained within the accepted framework. Let us consider what it would mean if the 4th dynasty pharaohs genuinely inherited rather than built the core monuments at Giza. They would have arrived at a plateau already dominated by massive structures, weathered by millennia of exposure, mysterious in origin. They would have faced a choice: acknowledge that they did not understand their inheritance, or incorporate it into their own narrative as builders and creators. The desert sands that buried and preserved these monuments also erased the temporary structures that would have supported construction, leaving us to guess at scaffolding and ramps. Incorporating ancient monuments would have been the natural choice for ambitious rulers. Every culture rewrites the past to serve the present. The pharaohs would have added their own temples, causeways, and burial chambers to the existing complex, claiming the whole as their achievement. They would have restored weathered surfaces, replacing damaged casing stones with fresh ones bearing their own inscriptions. They would have recarved the Sphinx's head, placing their own likeness on the most prominent monument. This inheritance model explains puzzles that the conventional narrative leaves unresolved. The lack of construction records makes sense if there was no construction, only restoration and addition. The sudden sophistication makes sense if capabilities were inherited rather than invented. The astronomical alignments to earlier eras make sense if the original planning occurred during those eras. The deep reverence shown to Giza throughout Egyptian history makes sense if the monuments were genuinely sacred, genuinely ancient, genuinely mysterious. The religious traditions surrounding the plateau would have reflected this inherited sanctity. If the monuments were truly products of 4th dynasty ambition, they would have been impressive human achievements deserving respect, but not necessarily worship. If they were perceived as gifts from the gods, from the beings who ruled during Tepi, they would have carried a different and deeper significance. The reverence accorded to Giza throughout 3,000 years of Egyptian history suggests the latter interpretation prevailed. This perspective does not diminish what ancient Egypt achieved. The civilization that flourished along the Nile for 30 centuries was remarkable by any measure. Its art, literature, medicine, mathematics, religious thought, and administrative sophistication stand on their own substantial merit. Egyptian achievements would remain impressive even if the greatest physical monuments on the Giza Plateau turned out to predate the culture that maintained and eventually claimed them. Modern laser scanning has revealed tool marks invisible to the naked eye, suggesting techniques that left distinctive signatures we are only beginning to catalog and understand. The secretive traditions of Egyptian priesthood take on new meaning if the temples preserved inherited knowledge. The initiation practices that guarded sacred teachings from common access would have served to protect not just spiritual insights, but actual information about origins that could not be publicly acknowledged. The temples as houses of life, centers of learning where texts were copied and recopied across centuries, would have functioned as archives preserving knowledge from before the flood. Academic resistance to alternative theories about Giza is fierce and often dismissive in ways that go beyond scientific skepticism into something closer to tribal defense. Researchers who question conventional dating face marginalization, denial of funding, exclusion from prestigious publications and conferences. The social cost of breaking with consensus is high enough that many who harbor doubts remain silent to protect their careers. Chemical analysis of mortar samples has shown regional variations in composition, indicating that different work crews may have used slightly different formulas for the same purpose. Some of this resistance is legitimate scientific caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the alternative timeline for Giza demands a complete revision of what we think we know about human prehistory. The burden of proof rightly falls on those proposing the revision. But legitimate caution becomes problematic when it prevents evidence from being fairly examined, when anomalies are dismissed rather than investigated, when questions are ruled out of bounds rather than answered. The alternative timeline threatens not just specific dates, but entire frameworks of understanding built up over more than a century of Egyptological research. Careers have been built on conventional chronologies. Textbooks have been written, museum displays created, documentary films produced. Admitting that the fundamentals might be wrong would require retracting work, revising teaching, acknowledging that confident assertions were premature. Institutions resist such admissions. The discovery of copper tools at Giza tells us what was available, but not necessarily what was used for the most demanding work on the hardest stones. Yet the resistance may be weakening as new evidence accumulates. The dating of Göbekli Tepe proved that sophisticated construction existed far earlier than conventional archaeology had imagined possible. Each year brings new discoveries that complicate simple narratives of human development. If the pattern continues, the questions raised about Giza may eventually receive the serious investigation they deserve, regardless of what that investigation reveals. Rope fibers preserved in dry storage chambers show that ancient Egyptians produced cordage of remarkable strength, essential for moving heavy loads across difficult terrain. Despite decades of research by both conventional and alternative investigators, the mystery of Giza remains fundamentally unresolved. We do not know with certainty when the Sphinx was carved or by whom. We do not know who designed the Great Pyramid, or how its extraordinary precision was achieved with the tools attributed to its supposed builders. We do not know what lies in unexplored spaces beneath and within the monuments. Wooden sledge fragments recovered from construction sites confirm at least part of the transport method, though how the heaviest blocks were moved remains debated. New discoveries continue to emerge. Hidden chambers detected by modern technology await investigation. Texts in museum collections remain unstudied, potentially holding information that could transform our understanding. Each finding adds detail to our knowledge while leaving core questions unanswered. The investigation is ongoing, and the final chapter has not been written. The truth may be closer than we think, or it may recede further with every apparent advance. The graffiti left by ancient work crews provides rare glimpses into their organization, with team names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure still visible on hidden stones. Science progresses not by defending established views against all challenges, but by following evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads to uncomfortable places. If evidence points toward civilizational existence before conventional history begins, if it suggests that the greatest monuments of antiquity predate the cultures that claimed them, the scholarly community should be willing to consider these possibilities seriously. Institutional inertia should not determine what questions can be asked. The monuments themselves are the most durable evidence we possess. They have survived earthquakes, floods, invasions, and the slow wearing of wind and sand across millennia. They have been stripped of their outer casing, penetrated by treasure hunters, climbed by countless tourists, and still they stand. Still they maintain whatever alignments and proportions their builders intended. If a message was encoded in their stones, that message remains, waiting for readers capable of understanding. The casing stones that remain at the base of the Great Pyramid show polishing marks that suggest rotary motion, though no rotary tools have been found in 4th Dynasty contexts. Whatever the truth about the builders of Giza may be, the monuments themselves transcend ordinary human achievement. They were built not just for one generation, but for eternity. They were designed to outlast empires, religions, entire civilizations. In this, at least, their builders succeeded beyond any measure we can fully appreciate. The pyramids have endured as the oldest and most mysterious of human legacies, older perhaps than we ever imagined. Internal survey data reveals that the passages within the Great Pyramid maintain their angles with extraordinary consistency over their entire lengths. As sleep approaches, let the mystery settle into your awareness without demanding resolution. The pyramids have kept their secrets for millennia, and will continue to keep them while researchers slowly accumulate evidence. The questions will not be answered tonight, but they can be contemplated as consciousness softens, as the mind releases its grip on waking concerns, and prepares for the different wisdom that dreams provide. The granite plug blocks sealing the ascending passage were cut to fit the space so precisely that they cannot be removed without destroying the surrounding limestone. The stars have shifted position since the monuments were aligned to them. The Sahara has dried since water carved its distinctive patterns into the Sphinx enclosure. Whatever civilization may have built these wonders has vanished so completely that even its name is lost. Only the stones remain, patient witnesses to ages we can barely imagine, silent guardians of secrets they have never revealed. Temperature measurements inside the pyramid show remarkable stability year-round, a characteristic that may have been intentional for preservation purposes. Perhaps future discoveries will unlock what remains hidden. Perhaps technologies not yet invented will reveal what lies beneath the sand and within the stone. Perhaps texts not yet translated hold keys to understanding what the builders knew and intended. Or perhaps the mystery will endure forever, an eternal invitation to wonder for every generation that stands before these monuments and asks, who could have made them? The bedrock beneath the Great Pyramid was leveled with such care that the variation across the entire base could be measured in fractions of an inch. The sands of Egypt have covered and uncovered many things across the millennia. Entire civilizations have risen beside the Nile, flourished, and passed into memory, while the pyramids watched unchanged. Whatever truths the monuments hold, they have proven patient beyond human patience, enduring beyond human endurance. They will outlast our questions as they have outlasted all the questions of all the peoples who came before us. The cornerstones of the Great Pyramid are themselves massive constructions, engineered to bear the immense weight of the structure above them across millennia. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of ancient mystery rest gently on your consciousness, without demanding answers. A civilization before the civilizations we know. Builders before the builders whose names we learned in school. A first time that may have been not merely myth, but memory, distorted by immense distance, but pointing toward something real. Let these possibilities accompany you toward sleep. The relieving chambers above the king's chamber were designed to redirect the enormous weight of overlying stone away from the burial space below. The Sphinx continues its eternal eastward gaze. The pyramids continue their precise alignment with the cardinal directions, their geometric perfection challenging every explanation. The stones continue to fit together with joints that our tools cannot improve upon. Whatever truth they embody has survived everything that 5,000 years or more could bring against it. It will survive our uncertainty. It will wait for understanding. The air shafts extending from internal chambers were oriented toward specific stars, though whether for ventilation or symbolic purposes remains uncertain. The internal passages of the Great Pyramid reveal complexity that the simple tomb theory cannot fully explain. The Grand Gallery, ascending at a precise 17-degree angle toward the king's chamber, features corbelled walls that narrow as they rise, a sophisticated architectural technique. The gallery is over 150 feet long and almost 30 feet high, far larger than any passage needed merely for access. Its purpose, beyond providing a route to the chamber above, remains debated. The so-called Queen's Chamber, despite its modern name, shows no evidence of ever containing a burial. Its walls are undecorated, unusual for a royal burial space. Two narrow shafts extend from the chamber toward the exterior, but stop short of breaking through, blocked by small doors discovered by robotic exploration. What lies beyond these barriers has never been determined. The chamber's actual purpose remains one of many unsolved puzzles within the structure. The descending passage aligns with Polaris at certain historical periods, suggesting that stellar orientation guided at least some aspects of the design. The subterranean chamber, carved from the bedrock beneath the pyramid, presents a strangely unfinished appearance that contrasts with the precision visible elsewhere. Some researchers believe it was deliberately left rough to deceive tomb robbers into thinking they had reached the bottom. Others suggest it represents an abandoned earlier plan. A pit in its floor descends even further into the rock, never fully explored, its depths unknown. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height encodes mathematical relationships that Egyptian sources never explicitly discuss or explain. The mathematics embedded in the pyramid's dimensions have fascinated researchers for centuries. The ratio of the perimeter to the height, when multiplied by 2, yields a value remarkably close to pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. The height multiplied by a specific factor approximates Earth's polar radius. Whether these relationships are intentional encodings or coincidental products of the geometry remains disputed, but the precision is undeniable. The Sphinx enclosure shows 2 distinct weathering patterns: vertical fissures from water runoff and horizontal bands from wind-driven sand erosion. The number 43,200 appears significant in pyramid mathematics. This number, which factors into the precession cycle of 25,920 years, seems to relate the pyramid's dimensions to Earth's actual measurements. If intentional, this encoding would demonstrate knowledge of our planet's size and shape that conventional history does not attribute to 4th Dynasty Egypt. The implications of such knowledge would be profound for understanding who built the monument. Core samples taken from the Sphinx body reveal limestone layers of varying hardness that weather differently when exposed to precipitation versus wind. Ancient writers described the Great Pyramid's exterior as dazzlingly white, covered in polished limestone casing stones that reflected the sun so brilliantly the monument could be seen from great distances. Most of these casing stones were stripped away centuries ago for building material in Cairo. A few remain at the base, giving some indication of the original appearance and demonstrating the extraordinary fitting precision that once covered the entire surface. The repair blocks added to the Sphinx over millennia provide a timeline of restoration efforts, each generation adding its own contribution to preservation. The granite used throughout the interior, particularly in the king's chamber and the relieving chambers above it, came from quarries at Aswan, some 500 miles to the south. The blocks were cut from living rock, transported the length of Egypt, lifted to positions high within the structure, and fitted with precision that leaves modern engineers wondering. No definitive explanation for how this was accomplished has gained universal acceptance. The Sphinx temple, directly in front of the monument, was constructed using blocks quarried from the enclosure itself, physically linking the 2 structures. The second pyramid of Giza, conventionally attributed to Khafra, retains portions of its original casing at the apex, giving visitors an impression of how the entire complex once appeared. Though slightly smaller than the Great Pyramid, it stands on higher ground and can appear equal in height when viewed from certain angles. Its interior is simpler than that of the Great Pyramid, with fewer chambers and passages, though still impressive in scale. The dream stele between the Sphinx's paws records Thutmose IV's promise to clear the sand in exchange for the kingship, indicating burial was a recurring problem. The third pyramid, attributed to Menkaure, is substantially smaller than its companions, but notable for the granite casing that originally covered its lower 16 courses. This granite, quarried at Aswan and transported the same 500 miles as that in the Great Pyramid, represents an enormous investment of resources. Some blocks remain in place, showing the precision cutting achieved even in this hardest of building stones. The Sphinx's missing nose has been attributed to various causes, but the clean break suggests deliberate damage rather than natural erosion or accident. The causeway connecting the second pyramid to its valley temple once formed an enclosed corridor decorated with painted reliefs. Though largely destroyed, fragments recovered during excavation depict standard pharaonic imagery, including hunting scenes and royal symbolism. Whether these decorations were original to the structure or added by 4th Dynasty restoration of something older cannot be determined from the surviving evidence. The coloring visible on the Sphinx's face in early photographs has faded, showing that pigments once enhanced features now bleached by sun and sand. The Valley Temple of Khafra is built with massive granite and limestone blocks in a style some researchers consider megalithic, similar to the Osirion at Abydos. The blocks are enormous, fitted without mortar, their surfaces plain and undecorated in ways unusual for Egyptian temples. This architectural simplicity may represent early development of Egyptian style, or may indicate construction during a different, possibly earlier cultural period. The Sphinx faces precisely east, aligning with the equinox sunrise, an orientation that would have required careful astronomical observation to establish. The Sphinx temple, positioned directly before the Sphinx itself, was constructed using blocks quarried from the Sphinx enclosure. This creates a physical and conceptual link between the two structures, suggesting they were conceived and executed as parts of a single complex. The temple's core is built in the same megalithic style as the Valley Temple, though outer walls of limestone were added later, possibly during restoration work. The bedrock from which the Sphinx was carved contains natural fissures that the original sculptors worked around, incorporating geological features into their design. The rock strata visible in the Sphinx body show the same patterns of weathering as the enclosure walls, confirming that whatever caused the distinctive erosion affected both equally. This weathering extends deep into the stone, far deeper than would be expected from only 4,500 years of exposure to Saharan conditions. Something significant happened to this stone long before the 4th Dynasty pharaohs arrived. The body of the Sphinx shows more severe weathering than the head, a discrepancy that has fueled debates about whether the head was recarved from a larger original. The face of the Sphinx has suffered severe damage over millennia, most notably the loss of its nose and the erosion of its features. Various explanations have been proposed for the nose damage, from Mamluk artillery practice to deliberate iconoclasm by religious zealots. Whatever the cause, enough of the face remains to allow analysis of its proportions and style, which some researchers claim do not match confirmed representations of Khafre. The polygonal masonry at Sacsayhuaman in Peru features stones with as many as 12 angles, each edge fitted to its neighbor with tolerances measured in millimeters. Archaeological excavations around the Sphinx over the past century have revealed various structures and artifacts from different periods of Egyptian history. These finds confirm that the Sphinx complex was actively used and maintained throughout the dynastic period, that it held religious significance for successive generations of Egyptians. But they do not resolve the fundamental question of when the original carving occurred. Easter Island's Moai statues were transported from quarries to platforms using techniques that islanders demonstrated for researchers using wooden sledges and rollers. The bedrock from which the Sphinx was carved contains layers of varying hardness and composition formed during different geological periods. These layers weather differently when exposed to erosion, creating distinctive patterns that geologists can interpret like pages in a book. The patterns on the Sphinx body and enclosure tell of prolonged exposure to conditions that have not existed in the region for thousands of years. The megalithic temples of Malta predate the Egyptian pyramids by conventional dating, yet show sophisticated astronomical alignments and acoustic properties. Multiple restoration campaigns over millennia have left their marks on the Sphinx. Blocks of varying sizes, shapes, and stone types were used to repair erosion damage at different periods. These repairs document ongoing efforts to maintain a monument that required constant attention, even in ancient times. A structure only 2,000 years old when the earliest repairs occurred would not typically need such extensive maintenance. The underwater structures at Yonaguni remain controversial, with some researchers seeing natural formations and others identifying stepped terraces and carved features. The temples of Karnak and Luxor, built during the New Kingdom more than 1,000 years after the Fourth Dynasty, demonstrate what dynastic Egypt could achieve with its documented technology. They are magnificent achievements, but they are also different in character from the monuments at Giza, more decorative, more explicitly religious, less focused on massive precision engineering. The comparison raises questions about what the Giza builders were trying to accomplish. Baalbek's trilithon stones in Lebanon weigh over 1,000 tons each, and no satisfactory explanation exists for how they were quarried, moved, and lifted into position. The obelisks that Egyptian pharaohs raised as monuments required enormous effort, but represented a different kind of achievement from the pyramids. Each obelisk was carved as a single piece from granite quarries, transported sometimes hundreds of miles, and raised to stand upright. We have detailed records of how some of this was accomplished. We have almost nothing comparable for the pyramids, despite the far greater scale of that project. The stone walls of Great Zimbabwe demonstrate sophisticated dry stone construction techniques that required no mortar, yet have stood for nearly a millennium. The hieroglyphic writing system appears in the Egyptian archaeological record almost fully developed, without the gradual evolution typically observed in the development of writing systems. This sudden appearance has led some researchers to suggest that writing, like pyramid construction, may have been inherited from an earlier tradition rather than independently invented by the civilization we know as ancient Egypt. The passage tombs of Ireland's Boyne Valley show evidence of sophisticated surveying to achieve their precise solar alignments over distances of many meters. The Book of the Dead and other funerary texts contain astronomical references that scholars have interpreted in various ways. Some see simple religious symbolism. Others detect encoded knowledge of celestial cycles, precession, and phenomena that would require extended periods of careful observation to understand. The texts may preserve knowledge accumulated by predecessors, whose observations spanned far longer than the dynastic period. The sarsen stones at Stonehenge were transported from quarries 25 miles away, a feat requiring organization and effort on a massive scale for a prehistoric society. The precision of Egyptian medicine, mathematics, and engineering suggests a culture that inherited substantial knowledge from somewhere. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes surgical procedures with an understanding that seems advanced for its supposed era. Mathematical papyri demonstrate capabilities that would take generations to develop. Either the Egyptians were remarkably rapid learners, or they were building on foundations laid by others. The Karnak stone rows in Brittany extend for miles across the landscape, their purpose unknown, but their construction requiring sustained communal effort over generations. The mysterious Edfu building. Texts describe the construction of temples according to plans that descended from the first time. These texts speak of builder gods who established the original patterns that later pharaohs were merely copying. Whether these descriptions are purely mythological or preserve genuine memory of actual predecessors remains debated. But the texts themselves treat the earlier builders as real rather than symbolic. The dolmens scattered across Korea number in the tens of thousands, representing an investment of labor that implies strong social organization in prehistoric times. Trade connections linked ancient Egypt to distant regions, including Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and possibly beyond. Ideas, technologies, and cultural practices moved along these trade routes. If an earlier civilization existed with global reach, its influence could have spread through similar channels, explaining the parallel development of sophisticated construction techniques in widely separated regions. The number 25,920, representing the approximate years of the precession cycle, factors into measurements found in monuments across multiple ancient cultures. The Nile Valley provided conditions uniquely suited to preserving ancient remains. Annual flooding deposited fertile soil, while the desert beyond the floodplain provided dry conditions that preserved organic materials for millennia. If evidence of a pre-Egyptian civilization exists anywhere, Egypt would be among the most likely places to find it, simply because conditions there favor preservation. Stellar alignments encoded in ancient structures shift over time due to precession, allowing researchers to calculate when those alignments were most precise. Modern technology continues to reveal new features of the Giza monuments. Ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and other non-invasive techniques have detected anomalies that may represent undiscovered chambers and passages. Each new survey adds data points, but definitive exploration awaits permission that Egyptian authorities have been reluctant to grant. What the builders achieved remains difficult to replicate with the tools and methods attributed to them. The solstice alignments at Newgrange were designed to admit sunlight for only about 17 minutes on the shortest day of the year. The muon tomography project that discovered the void above the Grand Gallery used cosmic ray particles to image the interior of the Great Pyramid without physical intrusion. This technique, borrowed from particle physics, offers possibilities for further discoveries. Other voids, other anomalies, other surprises may await detection by technologies that have only recently become available. Ancient calendrical calculations required tracking lunar and solar cycles simultaneously, a complex task that demanded generations of careful observation. Climate science has reconstructed the environmental history of the Sahara in increasing detail. We know that the desert was once green, that it supported populations who left behind rock art and artifacts across what is now barren sand. We know when conditions changed and the desert expanded. This knowledge provides a framework for understanding when different levels of the Sphinx might have been exposed to different weathering conditions. The Egyptian civil calendar of 365 days drifted against the seasons. Yet priests maintained accurate astronomical records that corrected for this drift. The precession of Earth's axis, the slow wobble that changes which stars appear where, over a roughly 26,000-year cycle, provides a kind of cosmic clock for dating astronomical alignments. If the Giza complex was designed to reflect celestial configurations, the configuration it reflects can indicate when the design was conceived. Multiple researchers, using different methods, have arrived at dates clustering around 10,500 BCE. The decans, 36 star groups used for telling time at night, required systematic observation and recording of stellar positions across the entire year. The age of Leo, when the Sphinx, as a lion, would have faced its celestial counterpart at the spring equinox, began around 10,970 BCE and ended around 8,810 BCE. If the monument was designed to align with this constellation, its conception would fall within this 2,000-year window. This dating predates the Fourth Dynasty by more than 6,000 years, requiring a complete revision of who could have planned the monument. The heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star visible from Egypt, marked the beginning of the annual Nile flood with remarkable consistency. The precessional alignment theory does not require that construction was completed in 10,500 BCE, only that the design was conceived then. A plan created during the age of Leo could have been partially executed, abandoned during catastrophic climate change, and completed or restored by later peoples working from inherited knowledge. This scenario would explain both the early design features and the Fourth Dynasty involvement. The cardinal orientations of Egyptian monuments required techniques for determining true north that achieved accuracy beyond what simple observation of the sun would allow. The megalithic yard, a unit of measurement that appears in stone monuments across Britain and continental Europe, may also appear in Egyptian monuments. If the same measurement unit was used by builders separated by thousands of miles, it would suggest either direct contact or common inheritance from an earlier source. The precise length of this unit, approximately 2.72 feet, allows detection of its use even without written records. The diagonal star clocks painted on coffin lids encode astronomical knowledge that took centuries of observation to accumulate and systematize. Comparative analysis of construction techniques across ancient sites reveals patterns that are difficult to explain as independent invention. The fitting of massive polygonal blocks without mortar, the precision cutting of extremely hard stone, the lifting and positioning of megaliths weighing many tons. These capabilities appear in sites spanning the globe. Either many cultures independently developed identical solutions, or they inherited techniques from common ancestors. The Dendera zodiac preserves star positions in a form that has allowed modern researchers to calculate the date it represents, though that date remains disputed. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a Greek shipwreck and dated to around 100 BCE, demonstrates that ancient peoples possessed mechanical capabilities far beyond what conventional history typically attributes to them. This device, an analog computer for predicting astronomical positions, was built with precision gearing that was not matched again until the medieval period. Its existence proves that ancient technological capabilities are frequently underestimated. The pyramid shape itself may have represented the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at the beginning of time in Egyptian cosmology. If the builders of Giza possessed comparable technological sophistication, most evidence of their tools and techniques would have been lost to time. Only their most durable products, the monuments themselves, would remain. We would face exactly the situation we actually face. Structures implying capabilities for which no direct evidence of the methods survives. The absence of evidence for tools does not prove the absence of tools. The Ba and Ka, components of the Egyptian soul, required the preservation of the physical body to maintain their connection to earthly existence. The Dendera Zodiac, a bas-relief from the ceiling of a chapel in the Dendera temple complex, depicts the constellations in positions that some researchers interpret as recording a date far earlier than the temple's construction. If this interpretation is correct, the zodiac would preserve astronomical knowledge inherited from deep antiquity, encoded in temple decoration for preservation across the ages. The opening of the mouth ceremony was believed to animate statues and mummies, allowing them to eat, breathe, and receive offerings from the living. Egyptian astronomical ceilings in tombs and temples often depict the decans, 36 star groups that divided the night sky into segments for timekeeping purposes. Tracking the rising and setting of these star groups required careful observation over extended periods. The sophistication of the decan system suggests astronomical tradition reaching back far before the earliest records that mention it. The Field of Reeds, the Egyptian paradise, was imagined as an idealized version of the Nile Valley, where the deceased would enjoy eternal abundance. The concept of the afterlife journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, contains astronomical elements that describe the movement of stars through the night sky. The deceased pharaoh was believed to join the circumpolar stars that never set, achieving immortality by becoming part of the eternal celestial pattern. This belief system encoded astronomical knowledge in religious form, preserving it for transmission across generations. The negative confession in the Book of the Dead lists sins the deceased must deny having committed, providing a catalogue of Egyptian moral values. The theory that civilization developed independently in multiple locations around the world, with no contact between early cultures, has been standard teaching for decades. But this theory struggles to explain why sophisticated construction techniques appear simultaneously in regions separated by oceans. Either multiple peoples independently invented identical solutions to engineering challenges, or knowledge spread from common sources through channels we have not identified. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at determined the deceased's fate, with failure meaning consumption by the demon Amet. The Americas present particularly challenging evidence for the independent development theory. Pyramidal structures, sophisticated astronomical alignments, and precision stonework appear throughout Mesoamerica and South America. The conventional explanation attributes these to purely local development, but the similarities to Old World monuments are striking enough that some researchers question whether the Atlantic was as impenetrable a barrier as traditionally assumed. The sun god Ra traveled through the underworld each night, battling the serpent Apophis to ensure the sun would rise again each morning. The underwater structures discovered off the coasts of Japan, India, and other locations raise questions about what might have been lost to rising seas at the end of the last ice age. Sea levels rose by some 400 feet as the ice sheets melted, inundating coastal areas worldwide. If early civilizations, like later ones, concentrated along coastlines, much evidence of their existence would now lie beneath the waves. The Osiris myth, in which the god is murdered, dismembered, and resurrected, provided a template for Egyptian beliefs about death and afterlife. The Yonaguni monument off the coast of Japan remains controversial. Some researchers see clearly artificial features, including terraces, steps, and geometric forms that suggest deliberate construction. Others attribute all features to natural geological processes. If artificial, the structure was submerged when sea levels rose around 10,000 BCE, making it contemporary with the dates suggested for the original Sphinx and the planning of the Giza complex. Temple rituals were performed daily to maintain cosmic order, with priests standing in for the pharaoh in the endless work of sustaining creation. Off the coast of India, structures have been detected that some researchers identify as submerged cities. The Gulf of Combat, in particular, has yielded sonar images of what appear to be urban layouts beneath the sea. Dating these structures is difficult, but if they prove to be artificial, they would demonstrate that sophisticated construction existed in the Indian subcontinent far earlier than conventional history acknowledges. The sacred bark of Amun was carried in procession during festivals, allowing the god to travel from temple to temple and receive public veneration. The island of Malta hosts megalithic temples that conventional archaeology dates to approximately 3600 BCE, making them older than the pyramids by conventional dating. These temples show sophisticated astronomical alignment and massive stone construction that appears without clear precedent on the island. The culture that built them seems to have disappeared, leaving the structures as their only testament. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that copper tools can cut limestone, but the rate of progress achieved falls far short of what pyramid construction would have required. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta, an underground temple complex carved from living rock, demonstrates that prehistoric builders could create sophisticated subterranean spaces. The acoustic properties of some chambers suggest deliberate design for sound amplification or particular resonance effects. Whatever purposes these spaces served, their creation required sustained effort and considerable skill. The workers who built the pyramids were organized into gangs with distinctive names, their identity preserved in graffiti hidden within the structures they built. The stone circles of Britain, including Stonehenge and Avebury, were constructed over periods spanning millennia, with the earliest phases dating to before 3000 BCE. These monuments demonstrate that sophisticated astronomical knowledge and organizational capability existed in northwestern Europe at dates contemporary with or earlier than the conventional dating of the pyramids. The builders of Stonehenge were not simple primitives. Bread and beer, the staples of the Egyptian diet, were produced in quantities sufficient to feed thousands of workers at the pyramid construction sites. The alignments at Stonehenge track solar and lunar cycles with precision that required extended observation to achieve. The famous midsummer sunrise alignment is only the most obvious of many astronomical relationships built into the monument. Understanding precession, tracking the moon's complicated cycle, positioning massive stones to mark these celestial events. All of this required knowledge and capability that developed over many generations. The seasonal rhythm of Nile flooding freed agricultural workers for construction projects during the months when farming was impossible. Newgrange in Ireland, a passage tomb older than the pyramids by conventional dating, features a roof box precisely aligned to admit sunlight into its central chamber only during the winter solstice. This alignment has remained accurate for over 5,000 years, demonstrating both the builders' astronomical knowledge and their construction precision. The monument was designed to last and to maintain its alignment across millennia. Ramps remain the most widely accepted explanation for raising pyramid blocks, though no ramp capable of reaching the upper courses has ever been found archaeologically. The Carnac stones in Brittany, France, comprise thousands of standing stones arranged in rows extending for miles across the landscape. The purpose of these alignments remains unknown, though various astronomical interpretations have been proposed. Whatever their function, their construction required sustained effort by organized communities over extended periods, demonstrating social complexity in prehistoric northwestern Europe. The internal ramp theory proposes that construction ramps were incorporated into the pyramid itself, hidden within the structure's mass. The presence of sophisticated monuments across Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Near East during the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE demonstrates that the capability to build impressive stone structures was widespread during this period. The question is whether this capability developed independently in each location or spread from common sources. The similarities between distant monuments suggest the latter possibility deserves consideration. Counterweight systems using the pyramid's own mass have been proposed as alternatives to ramps, though no direct evidence for such systems has been discovered. The Giza pyramids differ from other ancient monuments in their sheer scale and precision, but they share common features with megalithic construction worldwide: the use of massive stones, the precision fitting without mortar, the astronomical alignment. These characteristics appear repeatedly across ancient sites. The pattern suggests either independent convergence on optimal solutions or the spread of techniques from builders who established the template. The transport of heavy stones by water was possible during the annual flood, when the Nile rose to within a few hundred meters of the Giza Plateau. The Egyptian concept of Ma'at, usually translated as truth, justice, or cosmic order, represented a fundamental organizing principle of their civilization. Ma'at existed before the gods and would persist after them. If Egyptian religion preserved memories of an earlier civilization, Ma'at might represent their understanding of principles established during that earlier time, principles they were obligated to maintain. The precision required for the upper courses of the pyramid increased as the working space decreased, making the final stages the most technically demanding. The pharaoh served as intermediary between the divine and human realms, maintaining Ma'at through proper performance of ritual and just governance. This role implied connection to powers beyond ordinary human capability, a connection supposedly established during Tepi, when the gods walked the earth. The pharaoh did not create these connections, but inherited and maintained them. The capstone, or pyramidion, that crowned each pyramid was often gilded or covered in electrum, catching the first and last rays of the sun each day. Egyptian temple ritual involved elaborate procedures performed daily by priests who had undergone initiation into sacred knowledge. These rituals were believed to maintain cosmic order, to keep the forces of chaos at bay, to ensure the sun's daily journey across the sky. Whatever practical purposes the rituals served, Their practitioners believed they were continuing patterns established by divine predecessors. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from pyramid construction contexts has yielded dates both consistent with and slightly earlier than conventional chronology. The mystery schools of Egypt, mentioned by Greek writers who sought initiation into them, claim to transmit knowledge from the earliest times. Whether this knowledge was genuinely ancient or merely claimed to be cannot be determined from surviving sources. But the consistent claim of antiquity suggests that Egyptians themselves believed their sacred traditions reached back far beyond the historical period. Geological surveys of the Giza Plateau have mapped underground features that remain unexplored, including possible chambers and passages beneath the pyramids. Greek philosophers, including Pythagoras, Plato, and others, reportedly traveled to Egypt to study with priests who possessed knowledge not available in Greece. The Greeks, who created philosophy as we know it, recognized that older wisdom traditions existed and that Egypt was a repository of such knowledge. What the Greek visitors actually learned remains uncertain, but their respect for Egyptian wisdom is well documented. The debate between alternative and mainstream researchers often generates more heat than light, with both sides sometimes more interested in winning than understanding. Whether Plato's account preserves genuine Egyptian tradition or represents philosophical fiction remains debated. But the consistency of the date with independent evidence for climate catastrophe at the end of the Ice Age is striking. If Egyptian priests did preserve memory of civilizations destroyed during that period, Plato's account would be our earliest record of that memory in Western literature. Peer review, while imperfect, remains the best method for separating well-supported claims from speculation in archaeological interpretation. The concept of cyclical destruction and renewal appears in many ancient traditions. The Mayans calculated vast cycles of time, ending in cosmic transformation. Hindu cosmology describes ages of decline followed by renewal. Egyptian tradition spoke of the destruction of earlier worlds before the current order was established. These parallel concepts may reflect common experience of actual catastrophe in the distant past. The history of Egyptology includes examples of fraud and wishful thinking alongside genuine discoveries, making source criticism essential for any researcher. If cometary fragments struck Earth's ice sheets, the immediate effects would have been catastrophic. Massive flooding from melted ice, firestorms from impact heat, prolonged darkness from debris suspended in the atmosphere, disruption of climate patterns worldwide. A civilization existing at that time would have faced destruction on a scale difficult to imagine. Survivors would have faced a transformed world. New technologies continue to offer non-invasive methods for investigating ancient structures without the damage that traditional excavation would cause. The recovery from such catastrophe would have been slow and uneven. Knowledge held by specialists who died would have been lost. Infrastructure destroyed would have remained beyond replacement capability. Surviving populations would have faced immediate survival challenges that left little time for maintaining complex traditions. Under such conditions, knowledge would fragment and degrade across generations. The training of Egyptian archaeologists has increased dramatically in recent decades, shifting the field's center of gravity toward those most directly connected to the heritage. The myth of a lost golden age, appearing in cultures worldwide, may reflect genuine memory of times before catastrophe disrupted civilizational development. The Greek concept of progressive decline from a golden age through silver and bronze to the current Iron Age, the Hindu concept of degenerating yugas, the Egyptian concept of the first time when gods ruled directly, all may encode memory of actual better times in the distant past. Museum collections worldwide contain Egyptian artifacts that have never been fully studied, potentially holding information that could transform our understanding. The persistence of such myths across cultures that developed independently suggests either remarkable coincidence or common experience. Cultures do not typically invent stories of past greatness unless something triggers such invention. Memory of actual past achievement, even degraded by millennia of retelling, would provide such a trigger. The alternative, independent invention of identical myths, seems less plausible. The illegal antiquities trade has removed countless artifacts from their archaeological context, destroying the information that proper excavation would have preserved. The builders of the great monuments, whoever they were, understood that stone would outlast other materials. They built for permanence in ways that ensured their works would survive whatever catastrophes might come. The pyramids have endured earthquakes, floods, wars, and the slow wearing of wind and sand. Digital reconstruction allows researchers to visualize how monuments appeared in their original state, with colors, decorations, and architectural features now lost. The evidence accumulated over decades of research continues to raise questions that challenge simplistic explanations of how these monuments came to be. The precision of ancient monuments may itself encode a message. Structures built with tolerances that approach the limits of measurement are not merely functional, they demonstrate capability. They prove that their builders possessed knowledge and skill beyond what survival requires. Such demonstration might be intentional, a message to future discoverers that the builders were not primitive. The limestone cores, visible where casing stones have been removed, reveal construction techniques that the polished exterior would have hidden from ancient visitors. If the true builders of Giza wished to communicate across millennia, encoding information in stone was their best option. Written records decay or become unreadable as languages die. Oral traditions degrade with each retelling. But geometric relationships, astronomical alignments, mathematical proportions, these remain stable regardless of what cultures rise and fall in the interim. The burial of the ancient site in Turkey around 2000 BCE remains unexplained, as the deliberate filling of the site required nearly as much effort as its original construction. The study of ancient monuments using modern technology continues to reveal features invisible to previous generations of researchers. We can now detect voids within structures, map underground features, analyze rock composition, date materials with increasing precision. Each advance in technology opens new possibilities for understanding what the ancients built and why. The acoustic properties of the king's chamber create resonance at specific frequencies, though whether this was intentional remains a subject of ongoing research. Whatever the truth about the builders of Giza, the monuments themselves demonstrate that sophisticated capability existed in deep antiquity. Whether that capability belonged to 4th dynasty Egyptians, to predecessors they inherited from, or to both working at different times, the achievement is undeniable. The stones speak of knowledge and skill that commands respect regardless of when or by whom it was applied. The granite beams spanning the king's chamber show cracks that occurred in antiquity, yet the chamber has remained stable for more than 4,000 years. The science of archaeoastronomy has developed sophisticated methods for determining when ancient monuments were aligned to particular celestial configurations. By calculating the positions of stars, sun, and moon at various dates in the past, researchers can identify when a structure's alignment would have been most precise. These calculations repeatedly point to dates far earlier than conventional archaeology accepts for many monuments. The so-called Queen's Chamber contains no burial and may never have been intended for one, its purpose remaining one of many unsolved puzzles within the Great Pyramid. The complexity of Egyptian cosmology, with its multiple creation stories, numerous deities, and elaborate afterlife beliefs, suggests a religious system that developed over very long periods. Such complexity does not emerge overnight. It represents the accumulation of generations of theological thought, ritual development, and mythological elaboration. The depth of Egyptian religion implies depths of time beyond the conventional timeline. The grotto beneath the Great Pyramid, accessible through the descending passage, may predate the pyramid itself, possibly serving as a reference point for construction. The concept of kingship in ancient Egypt differed fundamentally from modern notions of political authority. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a living god, the embodiment of Horus on earth, the maintainer of cosmic order. This conception of divine kingship may have originated in times when beings of genuinely superior capability walked among humans, beings whose abilities seemed godlike to those who witnessed them. The boat pits beside the Great Pyramid contained disassembled wooden vessels, one of which has been reconstructed and displayed in a purpose-built museum. The administrative sophistication of ancient Egypt, with its complex bureaucracy, standardized weights and measures, and elaborate record-keeping, suggests a civilization that inherited organizational principles rather than inventing them from scratch. Such systems typically develop gradually over centuries. Their apparent presence from early dynastic times suggests foundations laid during previous eras. The causeway connecting the Great Pyramid complex to its valley temple has largely disappeared, with only fragments remaining to hint at its original decoration. The artistic conventions of Egyptian representation, with their distinctive profile views and hierarchical scaling, remained remarkably consistent across 3 millennia. Such stylistic stability suggests adherence to established patterns rather than ongoing innovation. The Egyptians may have been consciously maintaining traditions they believed originated with divine ancestors during the first time. The mortuary temples attached to each pyramid were where offerings were made to the deceased king, maintained by endowments that sometimes lasted for centuries. The medical knowledge demonstrated in Egyptian papyri includes anatomical understanding and surgical procedures that seem advanced for their supposed era. The Edwin Smith papyrus, describing trauma surgery with remarkable sophistication, suggests medical traditions that developed over extended periods. Whether this development occurred during the dynastic period or was inherited from earlier times remains an open question. The Sphinx's beard, fragments of which are in museums in Cairo and London, was probably a later addition rather than part of the original carving. The chemical knowledge required for mummification perfected over many centuries, demonstrates Egyptian understanding of preservation processes that extended to architectural concerns. The builders of the pyramids chose materials and construction methods that would resist deterioration over millennia. This concern for permanence pervaded Egyptian culture, suggesting awareness that important knowledge must be preserved across very long timescales. The mathematics required for pyramid construction included methods for calculating slopes, volumes, and orientations that Egyptian scribal texts describe in practical terms. The quarrying techniques used to extract massive blocks from Egyptian bedrock remain poorly understood. Modern experiments attempting to replicate these techniques using tools available to ancient Egyptians have achieved limited success. The gap between what we can demonstrate and what was actually accomplished suggests either lost knowledge or incorrect assumptions about available technology. The bureaucratic records that survive from ancient Egypt describe a society capable of organizing projects on enormous scales with remarkable administrative efficiency. The transport of obelisks from Aswan to temple sites throughout Egypt required moving single pieces of stone weighing hundreds of tons over distances of hundreds of miles. We have some records of how this was accomplished during the New Kingdom, involving thousands of workers, extensive planning, and specially built transport infrastructure. No comparable records exist for moving the even larger blocks used in pyramid construction. The Rosetta Stone's decipherment in the early 19th century unlocked Egyptian hieroglyphics, transforming speculation about Egypt into a discipline based on primary sources. The raising of obelisks to vertical positions after transport required sophisticated engineering understanding. Several ancient writers describe this process, and modern experiments have tested various methods. But raising an obelisk is simpler than constructing a pyramid, and even this simpler challenge has not been satisfactorily explained using only the technology conventionally attributed to ancient Egypt. The Egyptian language evolved over 3 millennia, from Old Egyptian through Middle and Late Egyptian to Demotic and finally Coptic, each stage leaving its own textual record. The temples of Abu Simbel, carved into living rock during the reign of Ramses II, demonstrate what New Kingdom Egypt could achieve with documented technology. These temples are impressive by any measure, but they differ in character from the Giza monuments. They are decorative, explicitly propagandistic, covered with inscriptions celebrating the king who commissioned them. The Giza monuments are austere, geometric, focused on precision rather than decoration. The village of Deir el-Medina housed the workers who carved and decorated the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, their daily lives documented in remarkable detail. The systematic dismantling of the pyramid's casing stones over centuries, primarily for building material in Cairo, destroyed evidence that might have clarified questions about their construction and original appearance. What remains are core structures stripped of their outer surfaces, robbed of whatever inscriptions or decorations those surfaces might have carried. We study monuments in degraded condition, not as their builders intended them. The strikes recorded at Deir el-Medina represent some of the earliest documented labor actions in history, when workers protested delayed rations by refusing to work. The builders of the pyramids and Sphinx demonstrated awareness of these variations, selecting different limestone for different purposes. This geological knowledge, combined with the precision of their construction, suggests comprehensive understanding of their building materials and environment. The tomb robberies that occurred even in antiquity prompted pharaohs to hide their burials in increasingly remote and inaccessible locations. Each new finding adds detail to our picture of the ancient past, while reminding us how much remains to be discovered beneath the sands. The mortar found in some pyramid joints has been analyzed, but never successfully reproduced. Its composition includes materials and proportions that create a bond stronger than the stone it joins. Whatever formula the ancient builders used, it has not been recovered despite modern chemical analysis. This represents knowledge that was either lost or never recorded in forms we can access. The mummification process evolved over Egyptian history, with the most elaborate techniques reserved for royalty and the highest officials. The acoustic properties of some chambers within the pyramids and other ancient structures suggest deliberate design for sound production or amplification. The king's chamber of the Great Pyramid resonates at specific frequencies when struck or when sounds are made within it. Whether this was intentional or coincidental cannot be determined, but intentional acoustic design would indicate purposes beyond simple burial. The canopic jars that held the preserved internal organs were protected by 4 minor deities, the sons of Horus, each assigned to guard a specific organ. The concept of sacred geometry, the use of mathematical proportions believed to possess spiritual significance, appears throughout Egyptian architecture. The same proportions appear in Greek temples, Gothic cathedrals, and monuments worldwide. Whether these proportions were independently discovered or transmitted from common sources remains debated, but their widespread use suggests something beyond coincidence. The Shabdi figures placed in tombs were intended to perform labor for the deceased in the afterlife, with some burials containing hundreds of these small servant statues. The golden ratio, approximately 1.618, appears repeatedly in Egyptian art and architecture. This proportion, found throughout nature in the spiral of shells and the branching of plants, was known to ancient builders and incorporated into their works. Its presence suggests mathematical sophistication that may have developed over longer periods than the dynastic timeline provides. The false door in Egyptian tombs served as a portal through which the Ka could pass between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The orientation of Egyptian temples typically aligned with celestial events, particularly the rising of certain stars or the sun on specific dates. Temples dedicated to particular deities faced the direction associated with those deities in cosmological geography. This integration of architecture, astronomy, and religion required coordinated knowledge across multiple domains. The offering formula inscribed on Egyptian tombs requested bread, beer, and other necessities for the deceased's eternal sustenance. The festival calendar of ancient Egypt tracked numerous celestial events, including solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of significant stars. These festivals structured religious and agricultural life around astronomical rhythms. Developing such a calendar required generations of careful observation and record-keeping, capabilities that suggest organized astronomical tradition extending back before the earliest records. The cartouche, an oval enclosing royal names, made pharaonic names easy to identify in hieroglyphic texts, greatly assisting early decipherment efforts. The precision required for astronomical alignment of temples meant that builders needed methods for determining true north, tracking the sun's path and identifying star positions with accuracy sufficient for their purposes. These methods, whatever they were, produced results that modern surveys confirm as remarkably precise. The achievement implies either sophisticated instruments or accumulated observational knowledge spanning centuries. The crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, combined in the double crown worn by pharaohs, symbolize the unification of the two lands under single rule. The concept of life force, or vital energy, known as Ka in Egyptian thought, represented an essential component of human existence that survived physical death. Preserving the body through mummification maintained a connection point for the Ka, enabling continued existence in the afterlife. This elaborate conception of spiritual anatomy developed over centuries of theological elaboration, suggesting deep temporal roots. The crook and flail, held by pharaohs in royal imagery, represented the king's role as shepherd of his people and as one who provided sustenance. The pyramid text, the earliest known religious writings from Egypt, appear carved in the burial chambers of late 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids. These texts describe the pharaoh's journey through the afterlife and his transformation into an eternal star being. The sophisticated theology they express seems unlikely to have developed during the relatively short period between the 4th dynasty pyramids and their inscription. The uraeus serpent on the pharaoh's brow represented the goddess Wadjet, who is believed to spit fire at the king's enemies. The coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom and the Book of the Dead that followed elaborated themes introduced in the pyramid texts, creating an increasingly complex picture of the afterlife journey. This theological development across centuries demonstrates how Egyptian religious thought evolved through accumulation and elaboration rather than revolutionary change, consistent with a tradition that valued continuity with the past. The Ankh symbol, representing life, appears throughout Egyptian art, held by deities and offered to kings as a sign of divine favor. The limestone quarries near the Giza Plateau show evidence of intensive stone extraction, with cut marks and abandoned blocks revealing something of ancient quarrying techniques. These marks suggest methods for separating stone from bedrock that were effective, but do not fully explain how the largest blocks were extracted without modern tools. The gap between what evidence shows and what was accomplished remains significant. The Djed pillar, associated with Osiris, symbolized stability and endurance, and was ritually raised in ceremonies celebrating the god's resurrection. The tools found in Egyptian archaeological contexts include copper chisels, stone pounders, wooden wedges, and various measuring instruments. These tools are adequate for many construction tasks, but seem insufficient for the most precise work found in the monuments. Either more sophisticated tools existed and have not survived, or techniques involving these simple tools exceeded what modern experiments have replicated. The Eye of Horus, representing wholeness and healing, derived from the myth of Horus losing his eye in battle with Set and having it restored. The organization of labor for pyramid construction would have required administrative sophistication equivalent to running a small city. Workers needed housing, food, medical care, and coordination across multiple specialized tasks. Evidence of such organization exists from the 4th dynasty, but the systems seem too complete, too sophisticated, to have developed without precedent. The scarab beetle, representing the god Khepri and the rising sun, appeared on amulets and seals throughout Egyptian history. The social changes that accompanied pyramid building transformed Egyptian society. The concentration of resources and labor required centralized authority capable of commanding unprecedented levels of cooperation. Whether this authority developed organically or was inherited from earlier systems of organization cannot be determined from available evidence. The annual Opet festival saw the cult statue of Amun travel by sacred bark from Karnak to Luxor Temple, accompanied by music, dancing, and celebration. The religious significance of the pyramids extended beyond serving as royal tombs. They represented cosmic mountains, the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at the beginning of time. They connected earth to heaven, providing a path for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the stars. This symbolic richness suggests theological depth accumulated over long periods. The Sed festival, or Jubilee, renewed the pharaoh's power after 30 years of rule, and at intervals thereafter, demonstrating continued royal vitality. The Benben stone, a sacred conical object associated with the sun god Ra, supposedly rested atop the original pyramidion of the earliest pyramid. This stone represented the point where the first rays of light touched the primordial mound at creation. The mythology surrounding the Benben connects pyramid symbolism to the earliest Egyptian creation concepts. The Sphinx, as an art form, appeared throughout the ancient Near East, with Egyptian, Assyrian, and Greek versions sharing leonine bodies but differing in details. The alignment of the three main Giza pyramids with each other forms a pattern that some researchers interpret as intentional. Whether this pattern mirrors celestial configurations or represents terrestrial surveying points remains debated. But the precision of the layout suggests deliberate planning rather than accidental arrangement. The ostraca, pottery fragments, and limestone flakes used for informal writing preserve personal letters, literary texts, and administrative notes in remarkable quantities. The Sphinx temple and valley temple alignments with the Sphinx itself create sight lines that some researchers believe tracked astronomical events. If correct, these alignments would integrate the entire Giza complex into a unified astronomical instrument. The consistency of alignment across structures separated by distances suggests coordinated planning. The wisdom literature of ancient Egypt, including texts like the Instructions of Ptahhotep, conveyed moral teachings that remained valued for millennia. The copper tools found in Egyptian contexts were soft by modern standards, better suited for carving limestone than shaping granite. How granite was worked to such precision with copper remains unexplained. Some researchers suggest that techniques for hardening copper existed but were lost. Others propose that different tools were used, tools that have not survived in the archaeological record. The love poetry preserved from New Kingdom Egypt reveals that romantic attachment was celebrated alongside the more formal aspects of Egyptian life. The wheel was known to ancient Egyptians, but was rarely used in construction. Sledges pulled by human labor were the standard method for moving heavy objects. Modern experiments have demonstrated that large blocks can be moved this way, but the scale of pyramid construction pushes these demonstrations to their limits. The largest blocks would have required techniques beyond what has been experimentally verified. The mathematical papyri that survive demonstrate practical approaches to calculation, with worked examples rather than theoretical derivations. The question of how the ancient Egyptians lifted massive blocks to heights of hundreds of feet has generated numerous theories, from external ramps spiraling around the pyramid to internal ramps within the structure. Each theory has supporters and critics. None has been definitively proven, and the true methods may have combined elements from multiple proposed solutions, or used techniques not yet imagined. The medical papyri combine empirical observation with magical incantations, reflecting an Egyptian worldview that did not separate the natural from the supernatural. This has been the story of the true builders of Giza, the civilization that may have existed before Egypt itself had a name. We have traced the evidence carved in water-worn stone, aligned with stars that have since moved across the sky, preserved in myths that echo across cultures and millennia. The official narrative remains dominant in academic institutions and museum displays. But the questions we have raised tonight do not simply disappear because they are inconvenient to established frameworks. The stones themselves invite continued investigation by all who are willing to look closely at the evidence and think deeply about its implications. As the night deepens around you, let these ancient mysteries accompany you toward whatever dreams await. The true builders left no names we can read, no texts we can translate, no direct testimony about who they were or what they knew. They left only their works, monuments designed to outlast everything, including the memory of their makers. In that ambition, they succeeded absolutely. The pyramids have outlasted every empire that has gazed upon them. The Sphinx has watched civilizations rise and fall from its eternal post. Their message endures in geometry and stone, waiting for readers patient enough to learn their language. Good night. Sleep well. Let the mystery of the true builders accompany you into rest. When you wake, the pyramids will still stand on their plateau as they have stood for thousands upon thousands of years, patient and enduring. The Sphinx will still gaze toward a horizon it has watched since before recorded history began, and the questions will still wait for answers that may yet emerge from the patient silence of deep time. Perhaps you will be among those who look more closely at the evidence and contribute to the slow uncovering of truth. The oldest monuments guard the deepest secrets still.